now is Mr. Nico Kleynhans.
It's time for Nico Kleynhans, exclusively on Breakfast with Friends.
Good morning, sir, and thank you very much for joining us in studio.
Good morning to you and also to listeners.
I'm curious to hear your stories of the quote-unquote dark ages.
Well, the trigger on this was going down memory lane. I had to telephone a leader of a Christian denomination in Nairobi in around 1973.
Okay, wow. That's before color TV was in South Africa. Actually,
was
TV.
Before TV in South Africa.
Exactly, 1973. Wow.
And to do that, you had to phone Telkom because that was the only way of getting communicating.
Was it called Telkom there, or was it the South African Post Office, actually?
Well, actually, you phoned the South African Post Office.
Yes.
And then they took your details. You had to give them the name of the person you wanted to phone. You had to give them the city, and you had to give them the telephone number of the recipient.
Okay.
And then they would tell you when the call could be made.
Wow.
And in this case, there was going to be a 4-hour delay. So what would happen is at the end of 4 hours, your phone would ring. They would then put you through to a tower in Johannesburg. Then the call would go from that tower by radio to Nairobi.
What?
And in Nairobi, the radio would catch the signal, and then it would go to their post office. And so the call would be via air.
Wow.
And you would be allowed 3 minutes
to talk, and that's it.
And at the end of the 3 minutes, the call gets cut. That's it.
Yeah.
But that was the way it happened. So when Telkom eventually then went on to selling shares, we all bought shares in Telkom because it was the only way of communicating.
That's it.
And that was before the mobile operators came going. So it was a good way of getting access to business, and which is my space. And then when the cell phone companies, the mobile companies came out and they started having shares, we all bought shares in those mobile companies as well.
Yeah.
And then if you wanted to travel overseas, you had to go and beg your mobile company to open up your number, and you had to go and get an extra bank overdraft.
That's right.
Because of the cost of overseas calls. And you had to get it set up 2 or 3 days ahead of time.
Yeah.
It was an extremely expensive package.
Yeah.
But again, the mobile companies made extra money and the dividends were substantial. When I travel now overseas, I don't even use my mobile phone at all because I use WhatsApp calls.
Yeah.
And those calls are now free of charge.
Yeah.
So today, nobody is going to seriously hope to get dividends from Telkom. In their latest annual report, their turnover went up by less than 1%.
Sure.
And that means they're not a long-term good investment. The same with the mobile companies. Because we are getting calls for free, they are going to have to make their money by other means. So they've gone into other avenues, but it's not relevant anymore. And to try and look at those business models as we looked at business 20 years ago means we are living in the dark ages.
Sure.
So the same goes for people in other areas. So for instance, if you were an investor in Tesla, you're in trouble right now because in the last year in Europe, their sales dropped by between 60 and 70%, depending on which country you're in, simply because the Chinese cars that are now being sold in those countries are beating Tesla.
Uh-oh.
And so if you are now hoping to make money as a shareholder, that's simply the wrong companies to have. The same as South Africans who tend to put money outside South Africa, hoping they can make money. If you put money into Russia, a lot of those companies are not going to make the kind of money that they were making a year or two ago. The same with if you put money into Ukraine, they're going to have the same issues right there. So if you are an investor, you can't put money away, look at it every 20 years, and then assume you're still going to make money.
Good point.
It's the same as people who put money into tobacco. The tobacco companies today are not making money out of cigarettes. They're making out of vaping and other products. There are serious health issues around vaping and other products. And so governments are putting different legislation in place. And so the profits they're making today are not going to be made in 3 or 4 years' time. It's the same with people who put money into sugar. There are health issues it's going to affect. So you cannot live as an investor today with the kind of portfolio you had 5, 10, 15 years ago. There are industries where you can make more money, but there are industries where you are not going to make money. Now, this need for humankind to be comfortable and not to review is costing us money. During the past few days, the JSE, and I'm actually going to read this because it's that important, has mentioned that there are 375,000 South Africans who have shares in 19 JSE companies. And they either are shareholders because they had shares or because they worked for those companies. And now those companies have lost track of where those people are residing.
So 375,000 people.
And now there's 4.5 billion rands worth of dividends that can't be paid out to those people. And again, that's because of humankind's negligence, or just we don't read paperwork. So if you have dividends due, you may not know it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a number, and hopefully we can put this number out there as well.
Definitely.
And that number is 0861 401 195. Now, remember, CCFM does not have the capacity to check up whether you are one of those 375,000 people. And my company does not have the capacity. And if you were a shareholder in those companies, or are a shareholder, or you had a relative who worked and passed away, then that number will tell you whether you qualify, or if you're the beneficiary because the relative didn't claim, and then you need to go through a process. But be aware, there are people who will contact you and say they will do so for a small fee. That is not necessarily not a scam. So you need to do the proper process and use the number that the JSE has put into place. But 4.5 billion rand is a lot of money that should be allocated to people. But my whole issue is that because we tend to want to be comfortable, we tend to become lazy and we tend to become negligent. And that can affect our finances. It can affect our finances by 10, 20, 30%. And when we get to retirement, we can lose out if we don't become agile. And agile is the opposite of living in the dark ages.
Exactly.
So, folks, we can make a difference to our finances, and we can be more agile about our finances as well.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Okay, so the number again is 0861 401 105.
Yes.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're going to have to phone that number. They're going to ask typically for the ID number or the ID number of a deceased relative that you think that might have JSE's shares. And obviously, you're going to need proof of address and things like that. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Check it out. There are 375,000 people who've got shares that are unclaimed that are part of the JSE. So that's so important. Nico, thank you so much. And also a reminder to all of us, go check what's happening on your side. And, have you checked your financial planning for the future? Thank you, Nico.